In this video, you're going to learn how to create subclasses using the ES6 class syntax. This is part 2 of 2 on ES6 classes. In the next video, we'll create React components. For now, let's focus on creating a subclass of person. So we have a class. Let's say we're creating a website for students, and we're going to call this one student. Class student, nothing earth-shattering there. We're then going to go ahead and set up those curly braces, and right away we realize that the student is actually just a person with some modifications. So the person has a name and an age, and students do indeed have names and ages. The student just also has a major that we want to keep track of. So instead of copying and pasting all of this code down below and modifying it to fit the needs of the student, we can actually just extend person from student. That's going to give us all of this functionality, and it's also going to allow us to override any of the functionality we might want to change. So let's take a quick peek at that. To get that done, we are going to create a class, student, after the class name, but before the curly braces. We are going to use extends. Extends is a special keyword we can use right here to say we want the class student to extend an existing class. What's that existing class? It's person. Now that we have this in place, we have a completely valid student definition, and a student, aside from their name, is identical to a person, and we can go ahead and play around with that. Down below, let's go ahead and get rid of both of these people. I'm going to swap them both out for students. I'm still going to leave the call to get description in place, and I'm still going to pass in the data, and you'll notice that everything works exactly the same. So this is basically like creating an empty class. We've done nothing meaningful. Now it's time to actually put some stuff inside of here and make student a worthwhile thing to use. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the constructor function for student to take that new piece of information, the major. Now, do we still want the name and the age? Yes, we still want the name and the age. We just want something additional. So we're going to set up the third argument to be a string. We can go ahead and add any major we want inside of here. I'll put my old major in there, computer science. Then we're going to go ahead and remove these guys right here. So we're going to remove the function calls, allowing us to just dump the raw student to the screen. If I save the file and I dump the student to the screen, what do we get? We get students with names and ages, but you'll notice that the major computer science was never set up. So here we are. We have our first reason to actually override something. What do we want to do? We want to override the constructor function. Now, we still want to do the same things with name and age. We just want to go ahead and tweak how it works. We want to add support for major. Right here, we're going to define constructor just like we did above. Constructor. We're then going to set up our arguments list, and we'll set up our function body. Now, the arguments for student are going to be all three of them: name, age, and major. Now, we could go ahead and set up a default for major if we wanted, but some students are undecided, so I will allow that to be completely optional. But if I did want to set up a default, it would look like that. I would put some string in there, maybe undecided, for example. But as I mentioned, we are not going to add any default value. Now you'll notice that name and age are also here. So the first thing you're probably asking yourselves is, do we have to set up the defaults for these again? And do we have to configure their properties? And the good news is no. So what are we really going to do in here? We're just going to set this.major equal to major. But before we can actually do this, we have to call the parent constructor function. We have to let it do its thing before we can do our thing. How do we do that? Right here, we use the special keyword in your class methods, super. Super refers to the parent class. In this case, the parent class of student is person. And if we call it as a function, this is exactly the same as accessing this guy. So what are we doing here? We're calling the parent constructor function. We're going to call it with the correct data, name and age, not really caring what the values are. We're just passing them through. So the defaults up here can be used, and we don't have to rewrite that code. And now if we go ahead and save our class example and check things out in the browser, you're going to see our students have names, they have ages, and they do indeed have majors, whether they're undefined because the student hasn't provided one, or whether they are a provided value, in this case, computer science. So there we have it. We can override the constructor function to tweak the subclass, modifying the data that gets passed in. Now, there are plenty of times where we also want to add on new methods, and doing that is really easy. All we have to do is set it up like we set up these guys. Make sure the name is unique. In this case, I'm going to set up has major, and has major isn't going to take any arguments. It's just going to return true if the student has set a major and false if they have not. And we'll be using the logical not operator to determine whether or not they have a major. You've probably seen that before. You just might not know what it's called. So if I have an empty string, this is a falsy value. This would fail an if condition. If I flip it using logical not, I'm taking that falsy value and I'm converting it to the actual Boolean true. So we have a true Boolean value here. Now, if I flip it twice, we take our falsy value and we actually convert it to false. We can also take a truthy value, like a string with text, and convert it to true. So that's a real common technique. If we flip undefined twice, we're going to get false, which is exactly what we would expect if we had no major defined. So using this little technique, we're going to be able to write the has major method. We are going to return the value of this dot major. We know that is either a string or undefined, and then we're just going to flip it twice. Perfect. Now we have a has major method, and we can go ahead and use this on any of our students. It doesn't exist on the person, but that's okay. So me.hasMajor. Do they have a major? Yes, they do. We should see true. And other.hasMajor. They have not defined a major, so we should see false, and that is exactly what we get. Over here, we got true and false printing back to back. Now, we've looked at a couple examples. We've seen we can tack on new data. We've seen we can tack on new methods. And we know that we can access methods from the parent. But what if we want to override one of them? So has major doesn't exist in the parent, and it's never going to. And get greeting isn't going to change if you're a student. You're still just going to say, hi, I am, followed by your name. But get description, we should probably change that for students. We should include their major somewhere in there. So what we're going to do is override this by defining the exact same method in the child class, getDescription. We can do this. And in here, we can completely change the behavior of this method for students. So for example, right now, let's just go ahead and return testing. We're going to return a little string, and we're going to make sure that shows up as opposed to this string. If we go ahead and play around with things, we can switch me.hasMajor over to me.getDescription. And we're going to do the exact same thing for the other student, getDescription. Now with this in place, we can make sure our little test message is printing by saving the file, the browser refreshes, and we get testing for both. So in this case, we've completely overridden the parent behavior. We've completely changed the behavior of getDescription, and we haven't included this at all in our code. We've just done something new. But we actually can call the parent and use that information as well. So let's go ahead and create a new let-based variable. We are going to let description equal, and we're going to actually kick things off by getting this description. So we're going to call the parent getDescription method, and we're going to integrate it into the child's method. And to do that, we use super once again. Now we use super and call it as a function to call the parent constructor function, but we can actually access all of the parent methods using super dot followed by the method name. In this case, we're trying to access getDescription, which does indeed exist on the parent. When we call it with whatever arguments we need, in this case there are none, we get the return result back. So this is going to be exactly like calling this instead. We can go ahead and prove that by returning the description. Now what do we get in the browser? What we get in the browser is our two messages completely unchanged, but we've set ourselves up to actually change them. Right here, we could go ahead and use our has major method to see if the person has a major, and if they do, we can include that in the string. We can concatenate on to the end. Right here, I'm going to do just that. We are going to check if the student has a major. Now remember, we want to access the particular instance, so that is this dot has major. That is going to check if the current student instance has that major defined. And if they do, and only if they do, we're going to modify the description. Let's go ahead and set the description equal to the description plus some string. We'll use a template string, and there's a shorthand for this. That is description plus equal some value. So that's going to have the exact same effect with a little less code. Now right here, what do we want to tack on? Well, this ends with a period, so let's start with a space, adding some room between the two sentences, and then we will have our message. Their major is, followed by the major. We're going to interpolate that value and toss a period on the end. In between the curly braces, what are we going to look for? We're looking for this dot major. We already know that exists because we checked using our method. Now that we have this in place, we can save the program and we should see a difference between our two students. And we are Andrew Mead is 26 years old. Their major is computer science. Anonymous is 0 years old. There is no message related to their major because they have none. So there we have it. We've taken our person class and we've extended it to do something new. And this is really important because that is exactly what we're going to be doing with React components. We're going to be creating our own classes that extend some class React gives us. That means I do want to give you a little more experience. So your challenge for this video is going to be to create a new subclass of person. The new class you're going to be creating is called Traveler, and Traveler is going to extend the person class. Now, this extension is going to require you to also set up a new piece of information. So with students, we added on a new piece of info, the major. For Traveler, you're going to add support for home location. So if I'm traveling, I want to be able to set my home location and use that throughout the class. Much like the major is the third argument for student, the home location is going to be the third argument for the traveler. Now, once you have that new data set up and you've customized the constructor function to work with it, you're going to go ahead and override get greeting. Remember, we haven't overridden get greeting so far, the one defined up above for person, but we did override get description, and we're going to be using the exact same techniques to do that. Now, there are two ways this can go. Get greeting is going to have an if condition. If there is a home location, you're going to include that in the message. So you're going to have the greeting from up above, and you're going to call that super method. So it'll say, hi, I am Andrew Mead. And don't redefine this. Make sure to use the super method. And then you're going to tack on something about your home location. I'm visiting from Philadelphia, if that's the string I happen to use. So that's what should print if there is a home location. Option 2, if there is no home location, you're just going to stick with the parents string, which is, hi, I am Andrew Mead. Now, when you're done and you've completed all of those tasks, make sure to actually test things out. You want to go ahead and call get greeting for both and ensure that you get the correct results. This guy with no home location should just print his name. Hi, I am Anonymous. This guy, who should include a home location, should be printing something like this. Take some time to knock this one out. No rush. Pause the video, test your work, and when you're done, go ahead and click play. How'd you do? Let's go ahead and knock this one out. Step 1 is going to be to create that brand new class Traveler. Awesome. And we're going to extend person. We're using the extends keyword to extend person, and then we're going to open and close our curly braces. Now at this point, we have a completely valid class. The first thing we're going to do is set it up to no longer support a major, but to support a home location instead. So I would type Philadelphia, where I'm currently living for this guy, but you could leave it off like we leave it off here. Now, if we actually want to do something with that, we have to override the constructor exactly like we do up above. We're going to do that by defining it. We're going to set up all of the arguments that are going to get passed in, name and age, which go up to the parent class, and in our case, home location, which is specific to the traveler. Then we set up our curly braces, and inside of here, we start off with a call to the parent constructor function, making sure that name and age are set up correctly. That is going to be super. Passing in name and age, not really caring what the values are. We're going to let the parent constructor function worry about things like setting defaults. All we care about is home location. We don't need a default value. This dot home location will equal whatever got passed in. Maybe it's undefined. That's okay. Now that we have the constructor in place, we can at least play around with the new class. I'm going to change both of these students over to travelers. And I'm just going to dump the class to the screen. So I'll remove the method calls completely. And as long as we see the new property showing up, we know we're headed in the right direction. That is exactly what we're getting. We got name and age, and we have home location correctly set here and set to undefined correctly down below. Now, we don't need a new method for Traveler. You might have added one. That's great. The only thing you needed to do for the challenge was to override get greeting. So that's where I'm going to start. Get greeting. Now, up above, you can see I mistyped it. It should be greeting. I'm going to go ahead and change that up here, and I'll also change it down below. Awesome. And from here, we're going to set up our arguments list as well as the curly braces. Now, what is getGreeting supposed to do? Well, we outlined that if there is a location, we want to do one thing. If there isn't, we want to do something else. So we're going to go ahead and follow that same pattern. We can go ahead and start by getting the parents version, let greeting equal. Here we're going to call super.getGreeting. That'll get the original greeting, and then we're going to go ahead and return it. Return greeting. For some reason, I can't seem to type greeting correctly. 2 E's, 1 T, perfect. Now, what do we want to do in certain situations? Well, we always want to do this, but in some situations, we want to customize the message. We want to do that if there is a home location. If this.home location, if that is a truthy value, we're going to go ahead and run this code, and we're just going to concatenate onto the greeting. So that is greeting plus equals to add something on to the end of that existing string. We'll use a template string since we will be injecting some data, and we'll start off with a space to add a space between the two sentences. I am visiting from, followed by the location. We're going to interpolate that, this.home location, close off that curly brace, toss a period on there for good measure, and we are all done. We should be able to call getGreeting for both of the travelers and see the new behavior. Me.getGreeting. And down below, for other.getGreeting. Let's go ahead and save the file after removing the comments and see what happens. I'm going to save the file, it's going to rerun, and right here, everything is working as expected. The first traveler with a home location says, "Hi, I'm Andrew Mead, I'm visiting from Philadelphia." The second guy with no home location says, "Hi, I am anonymous." Now I could always pass in undefined for the first two values and pass in a location for the other one. Someone with no name is probably from nowhere, so let's go ahead and toss that in. And there we have it. I am anonymous. I am visiting from nowhere. That is it for this video. We learned all about how to create a subclass. That's going to be really useful in the next one. Let's take just a couple of seconds to recap. In this one, we learned that we can extend an existing class. In this case, student extends person. That allows us to get all of the behavior of that class without needing to copy and paste the code. We can always customize the behavior. We can add new methods. We can override ones from up above. And in the case of student, we can just let getGreeting from the parent be that method. There is no need to override getGreeting. We would only do that if we wanted to. For student, that allowed us to add a new method, has major, and some new data. And for traveler, it allowed us to also add a home location where we overrode the getGreeting method. We're going to be using these exact techniques in the next video. I am very excited to get to that, so let's go ahead and jump right in.